Guys, craft of writing, we know that there's up to 2 parts, composition and reflection. And here's the main thing I want to show you. You need an imaginative, a persuasive, and a discursive, right? You probably only have one of those right now. We want to make sure that you have that base one that maybe is your preference, or maybe it's the one you had to do for an assessment or something like that. And you want to make a variation for each one, right? So you want to make a core draft. You want to make a core draft, and that can be based on the text type that you like. So if you like doing an imaginative, that will be your core draft. I've done an example as an imaginative in this diagram, but yours might be persuasive, yours might be discursive. You guys might be asked a specific text type in the composition part. So it might say, create a persuasive composition. It might just say that. It might say, create either a discursive or persuasive, or it might say, create a discursive, persuasive, or imaginative. And that's what everyone wants, don't they? Because you get a choice then. Everyone wants the choice. But we learned a couple of years ago in the HSC that they can ask for a specific type. They can say just imaginative. They can say just discursive. Therefore, to be prepared for the worst case scenario, you need to have some kind of version, some variation drafted for each text type here. Here's the first step though. Here's the first step. See the green box? You make your core draft. You need to have an extended version. I put 32 minutes. As you know, I'd probably go for more 30 minutes for module C. So you want to have a 30-minute, 20-mark response for your preferred text type. Create your first core draft. You probably all already have one based on assessments. You want to perfect that based on a certain question. And you want to know that you have a 30-minute kind of version of that, right? Maybe it's less, maybe it's 25 minutes. I wouldn't mind that. That's the one you'll use for a 20 marker if you get asked about that and if you get the perfect stimulus. If you don't get the perfect stimulus, you might have to adapt it. You then want to have a short version of that. So you have your core piece, you have an extended one, then you find an appropriate place in the composition that you could actually cut the rest off and you could just be left with the first part. So find an appropriate point in time that you could actually end your composition if only asked for a 10 or 12 mark question. You then need to create 2 variations. So you need to have a discursive variation and a persuasive variation. What I mean by a variation of the core one is that you should not change the core concern of the piece. This is the critical point. You should not change the core focus of the piece. So if you currently have a discursive and you're exploring, you should be emulating the style, but you should also be making sure that what you're talking about is something quite similar. Why do I say that? Because some of the questions you can get actually will require you to offer a similar or different perspective to what the prescribed text was about. So it's not just telling you to use some of the language features like, oh, use first person or use an extended metaphor. It's saying you actually need to recreate a moment from the text. So it's better if your draft is closely connected with what the prescribed text in Module C was about. Even though you were required to study at least 2, I focus on 1 and I use those same stylistic elements in all of the versions. So if I'm doing a discursive or an imaginative or a persuasive, if I'm focusing on a particular stylistic element like an extended metaphor or an anecdote, I'm going to use them. I'm going to use that same thing in all of them. So when you convert it into a persuasive, you can still have an anecdote, for instance. You can still have short syntax. You can still have a lot of the language features that you might be using in the other ones. You need to also have things that are to do with a persuasive. So if you guys see this table here, see the persuasive column, you need to use more rhetorical questions. You need to use repetition. You need to use high modality. Like if someone's trying to persuade you of something, you're probably going to say, you must do this, or you should do this. Or this has always been the case. So you would use that kind of language, but you can still be talking about the same thing that you were exploring in the discursive. Your tonality is different, isn't it? If you're trying to persuade someone versus contemplating something or reflecting on something in a discursive, the tone's changed, the style has changed, but you can still have a lot of overlapping elements. All right. So you need to kind of update the tone. You need to modify the tone and the structure a little bit, but you should still be ultimately talking about the same thing in all 3 types. So in all 3 of those drafts, I would still have the same concern. For instance, if I have a persuasive about what makes a good leader, or that like all leaders are corrupt. Maybe I'm making that argument, right? Then my discursive would also be about the same thing. And I'm going to be able to preserve a lot of my persuasive elements. I'm just going to have to change the tonality to make it a little bit more reflective. Okay. So the discursive is going to still be about leaders and whether we have good leaders or not. It's just not going to be like kind of forcing the argument upon the reader as much. And then with the imaginative, my story is going to be about someone who's writing about a leader, or they themselves were a leader and they're doubting their leadership. And it's going to still cover the same ideas. So I would have that consistent concern there.